Okay, we're going to talk about Gothic art and architecture. We're still talking about Western Europe, and here we're starting to see countries form. This is just after the Romanesque, around the year about 1100 or so, 1150. And you'll notice countries are starting to form. There's still lots of uncertainty. Half the time England takes over part of France, and France takes part over England, and you'll notice that the Moors are still holding sway in most of Spain, and so there's a lot of back and forth here. So we're still talking about this area. And the Gothic is going to take what they started in Romanesque art, building of major cathedrals, and they're going to expand on that notion for spiritual reasons as well as financial. Remember that cathedrals not only were the seat of spiritual life for the people around them, but also they held relics. And so pilgrims would go from cathedral to the cathedral all the way through Europe, all the way till when they got to the very coast of Spain. And it's a religious pilgrimage. They would visit these cathedrals and pray and make offerings and get blessed by whatever holy relic was buried within the Catholic cathedral's environment, whether it's a piece of the true cross or the crown of thorns or the chemise or drape for the Virgin Mary or the shroud of Turin, whatever it is, okay? And remember, these things actually had spiritual power, spiritual power, okay? So to achieve this new spirituality and increase it, a gentleman named Abbot Suger, it looks like sugar up there, but it's Suger, is going to devise a plan with some architects on how to make the Catholic cathedral, the Gothic cathedral, even more of a spiritual experience. One is to increase its height, and two is to get rid of a lot of the weight of the stone in the walls and replace it with stained glass windows. Height in all cultures that we've been looking at, physical height, it means closer to God. Okay. Same thing here. And light is a symbol for God, God's presence in Catholic belief, okay? And so therefore, when you're letting in more light, especially colored light, it's meant to be a transformative spiritual experience. Not only is God present because the light is coming through, but it's also meant to be so beautiful and dazzling that you are transported and uplifted as well. Your spiritual experience gets heightened, literally, physically, and emotionally, spiritually. Okay? It's meant to make you think you're living here, heaven on earth. And if you're living in a hovel during the Gothic or the Middle Ages, you're going to go into one of these churches and be transported. So these are some of the stained glass up close at Chartres. This is in France. Okay? These would have been costly to make, and they're incredibly heavy because that's lead. That's the actual black that you see holding the glass in place. Okay? It would have been expensive, which means the church is making a lot of money at this time. Naturally, pilgrims are off. Tithing is like, of course. Because remember, the church is not only the seat of spiritual power, but it's also going to give you your education, if you're lucky enough to send children to be educated there. It's also the only place that sort of had sort of a, say, governmental sort of way, but it does offer protection and sanctuary during battles between various armies. This is where people run to be protected because the church is sacrosanct. And it's also a place where if you're an innkeeper in Chartres, France, The pilgrims that come to visit this cathedral are going to need a place to stay, and they're going to stay at your little inn. Or they're going to need to house their horses, or they're going to buy clothing, or whatever they're going to do. It's going to bring commerce to the people living around it. So it's a multifaceted blessing to have these places look as beautiful as they are. This is the western portal of Chartres. We're going to look at the main tympanum here in the center. This is the tympanum, that's the semicircular piece in the middle there. We've got saints and apostles and angels in this piece. This is the last judgment. He's got his hand up. He's judging. On the right, on the right side of this, on the other one of the other tympanums, you see Christ's incarnation, and the other on the left is left is incarnation, and right is ascension to heaven. Okay. But here in the middle, we've got him doing the last judgment. This is to remind you what Christianity's basically about. It's a little. Sometimes these last judgments have, in some tympanums and doorways, they've got the actually the damned in the lower register there, and it's meant to scare you a little bit, remind you of why you're coming to this place to achieve your spiritual oneness with God. Okay. There's always a little bit of a guilt complex or threat, a little sort of understated in my feeling, okay, to this. It's a little bit like this, remember why you're here. Okay, that's what it's about. Here's the interior of Chartres. Okay, notice that the walls are getting, the stone treatment is lessened. And you'll notice the top is something like called a pointed arch. That's going to be one of the devices that Abbot Suger is going to invent that will help increase the height of these Gothic cathedrals. Rather than a rounded arch or a rounded vault, we've got a pointed one because it's better at distributing the weight away from the, even more evenly and a little bit more efficiently down to the ground. So that allows for more and greater height. I also want you to notice how much light is being let in by not only the clerestory windows, but all the stained glass as well. The second device that Abbot Suger invents, or him and his architects come up with to keep the walls upright because of the heavy weight of the stained glass windows, is called a flying buttress. That is literally an outside support. We're going to see them you're going to see them on all the Gothic cathedrals because they're really breaking the laws of architecture, trying to get as high and as much glass in there. Without the supports and without the invention of a pointed arch, it would not be possible. The walls would not stay upright. Just know about the barrel vault. That's all you need to worry about. But you'll notice on the outside of Notre Dame here are the flying buttresses that go all the way around the outside of the building. It's keeping those walls up. Without it, it would be impossible. And also during this time period, most Catholic cathedrals in the West had wooden roofs, wooden roofs in their spaces, not stone. Okay, and they used to catch fire all the time, which is why they're constantly having to be rebuilt. And as a matter of fact, in 2017, Notre Dame, one of the most gorgeous places I've ever seen inside, burned down because of and lost its original wooden roof from when it was originally constructed. Caught fire during I think they were just refurbishing part of the place, and during that some careless workman or whatever set fire to the roof, and that literally caused the destruction of this cathedral that they're trying to reopen still to this day. Here's the interior of Sainte-Chapelle. This is just one of the chapel spaces. It's not even the main altar. Okay, that tells you how amazing these places could look, and how transformative it would be for the parishioner when they visit. You really would be convinced that God was here. These are called jam statues. We saw them outside the doorway of Chartres Cathedral. Rather than the caryatids or the caryatids of ancient Greece, they're actual human figures that actually hold up, that actually act as the column. Here, these are more like relief sculptures on the outside. Okay, they're more like, there's still a column behind there, okay? And these are Old Testament kings and queens that are being portrayed here, but notice how figuratively they are not realistic. Remember, they're very long. They're meant to echo the look of the column, okay? But naturalism in the human form is not important. Matter of fact, it's actually shunned at this time. Because remember, the body is a way for sin to enter your life, whether it's through gluttony or lust or greed or whatever. So to deny the flesh was to save your soul, okay? So it's really meant to be more decorative, and it's meant to make you think of the columns. It's meant you think of the people too. But you'll notice these jam statues from a little bit later on are starting to look a little bit more naturalistic. We've got a little bit sort of an easier, more relaxed pose of the body. The bodies themselves seem more substantial. A little bit more, not quite realistic, but pretty. It's getting better. It's getting closer. The matter of fact, we even got a kind of 3/4 view of St. Jerome there in the middle, with his face turned. Okay, so it's a little bit more, not quite as decorative, shall we say, and less stressing on keeping away from naturalistic representation. Here we're starting to let it kind of come in a little bit. So that brings us to icons. Remember, icons are meant to inspire, instruct, and actually be holy and magical as of themselves. This is an early one from way back in early Western art, and you'll notice it's got all the hallmarks of it. Very flat, that gold background. The faces look interchangeable. The bodies look completely flat. The drapery is just meant to be decorative. That's what it's meant to be on purpose. Okay. And here we are, one from the Byzantine. I show you this Jesus raising Lazarus from the tomb for a purpose, okay? Even though it's from the Byzantine. It has all the hallmarks of a Gothic icon as well. And that is the gold background. Christ is actually standing on top of death. That's who he's standing on with the chains around his arms. It's got his one hand on the foot of Lazarus as he's being, dragged out of the grave, okay? Here, the drapery is meant to be decorative. The color's meant to be bright. It's meant to it's meant to tell you the story of Lazarus and the triumph of Christ over death. Okay. It's meant to be holy out of itself. Okay. Here's a piece from later on called The Dance of Death that harkens what's going to happen pretty soon later in the end of the Gothic. These people are still looking somewhat flat, but they're starting to look a little bit more realistic. Not totally, okay. A little bit more three-dimensional in a way. But what's great about this piece is its symbolism. Here we have a king on the far left with his arm in arm with the skeleton, who of course is a symbol for death. In the middle, we've got the royal or the noble woman, who's arm in arm, and then of course on the far left is the gentleman. He's that guy is actually a wine or beer merchant, okay? And no matter what your station is in life, and no matter how old or young you are, every day you are dancing the dance of death. You're walking one day, one step at a time, one moment to moment, closer to death. And remember, at this time period, the bubonic plague starts up around the mid-1300s, I want to say, and 25 million people or so died of bubonic plague, and it came in waves. It keeps resurfacing all the time. Okay, it's going to keep coming on. I think it keeps resurfacing all the time in Europe until about the year. I want to say it didn't finally stop coming until 1800s. It's going to last that long. It's not as deadly as the original epidemics, but this is meant to remind you that you could die any day. So you better get right with God. You better be right with your Maker. Because every day you're dancing with death. Here's another piece. This is a St. Francis altarpiece, and that's him in the middle. He's the head of the he founds the Franciscan order of monks, but he was actually born a wealthy son, and he left that behind, and he devoted himself to poverty, chastity, and had several miracles to his resume, shall we say. He's the patron saint of animals. If you see a statue or a concrete statue of a man in front of somebody's front yard, and it looks like this guy, kind of a monk-looking guy, but he's got a bird or a bunny or both sitting next to him, or in his arms or his hands or on his shoulder. That's St. Francis. But notice here the scenes from his life and the scenes from Christ's life here as well are not meant to be believable naturalistically. Okay, notice how flat they are and decorative. They're meant to tell the stories. Okay. So here we have an icon from the 6th century on the far left. It's got all, we talked about that stylistic things going on there. But on the right, we have an icon from around the year 1200-ish, late 1200s, from Cimabue. The artist's name, we actually know it, Cimabue. The Madonna is sitting on a three-dimensional throne in one-point linear perspective. She actually sits on a believable three-dimensional space. Granted, the rest of it's still very much Gothic. We've got the gold background. All the faces seem very similar. It's highly decorative, but she's actually sitting on a throne that is 3D. And on the right here, there's Cimabue again on the left, is Giotto's Madonna from around 1300-ish. Giotto is he's sort of the successor of Cimabue. And he takes what he learns from him and expands on it. Giotto is Giotto, is going to be incredibly important in the art world because he ushers in the Renaissance. He is the bell ringer. And we see here the Madonna again sitting on a three-dimensional throne. But Giotto's going to go on further than this even. This is one of his scenes from the Padua or the Arena Chapel. This is called the Annunciation. Notice here we have a real landscape with trees and a fence and grass. We have a three-dimensional space that they're actually sitting under. We actually have somewhat of a forms going on here. They're actually in three-quarter view. The color's realistic. There's no more gold sky. These are all hallmarks of the beginnings of the Renaissance. And here is Giotto's Christ raising Lazarus from the dead. You'd probably be asked to compare these two on your final exam. And this is just a scene from one of the images. Now he's gotten so humanistic and so natural that Giotto includes these two sleeping soldiers in a painting.